This is Talking Drupal, a bi-weekly chat about web design and development by a group of guys with one thing in common. We love Drupal. We record this live on Wednesday afternoons in a Google Hangout. Visit us at talkingdrupal.com. This is episode 108, Wednesday, November 18th, Drupal Audit. Welcome, guys.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
And welcome back, John. You were on vacation last week. How was your vacation?
It was great. I had a good time and got a little bit of sun. It was kind of shocking to come back up to the Northeast where the temperature was about 50 degrees different.
Yeah, it got a little cold here the last couple of days. So I saw your pictures on Instagram and Facebook and everything. Looks like you had a good time.
Yeah. Had a pretty good time.
Good. And that would be John Picozzi from Oomph. So welcome, John. And also we have Nick Laughlin from Enlightened Design. Welcome, Nick.
Thanks for having me again.
No vacation for you last week, huh?
No vacation, but we're talking about going somewhere this winter for about a week, just trying to decide exactly when. But so kind of looking forward to that, but haven't firmed up any plans yet.
Hey, if you want a little bit of a vacation, you can go right down the street there and listen to Donald Trump.
Where's Donald Trump?
What does that mean?
He's going to be in Worcester tonight, I think.
Is he really?
Oh yeah.
Oh really?
Well, I kind of camped out the side of the road to see Obama. What was it, a year and a half ago? I don't know if I'll do the same for Donald Trump. But we'll see.
So I guess we'll stay away from the politics for now.
Yeah, you should always stay away from that.
All right, so today's show, Drupal Audit. We're talking today about how things you should look at in terms of auditing a Drupal website. So many of us find ourselves in a situation where we're getting involved in someone else's work. It could be that we're going to support a website built by someone else. And I guess it doesn't have to always be someone else. It could be a site that you built a number of years ago and you need to do an audit on it. So we're going to talk about the things to look at today when you're evaluating the health status of a Drupal website. So when do you guys do Drupal audits? Do you do them when someone asks you to, or do you do them anytime you're starting a project that you're inheriting?
When I first started working with Drupal is kind of when people ask me to, but for a very long time now, if I'm going to be working on a site that I haven't worked on before, I generally make an audit as part of the requirement. The only exception to that is occasionally if I'm partnering with an agency that has had the project for a long time, because it's an agency that I've worked for in the past, because I kind of know how they do things, and if there's any, I have any questions about anything that comes up, there's a resource to ask. But if it's a project that I'm going to be inheriting internally, then as a requirement to taking over the project, there's an audit involved.
So if you're working with someone that you have history on, you're kind of saying that the audit's not as important to you.
Correct.
Yeah. So
yeah,
so when you say that, it's about the developer, right? It's about who the previous person was that built that site.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah, that's the same for us. We usually, if we're taking a site on through our service, our ally service, which is our service and support program, we'll do a site audit first. For two reasons: to let the client know if we find anything that's kind of a concern to us, and to also protect ourselves from inheriting something that could potentially break down the road. I think it's important whenever you take on somebody else's project to do that. As with Nick, internally we don't tend to do that all that often, because if we have questions, we can always go ask the resource. But I think when you're getting something from an outside agency, it's definitely, or an outside freelancer for that matter, it's definitely important.
I also think there's value in doing it as just part of your regular process, even if it's a developer that you're comfortable with and an agency you've worked with in the past. I think it does give you some groundwork for starting a project. It gives you sort of a level set of getting a basic understanding of, how much content is there, what are the modules that are there. There's a lot of things that are valuable, even if you're not doing an audit, to return to someone in sort of an evaluation of the health.
I think it's definitely helpful in that aspect as well. If I'm getting a project for somebody, I may do not a crazy in-depth audit, but I may do kind of a overview of it just to get an idea of what the site does, and to be able to ask any questions up front before I start working on it. Hey, why did you do this, or why is this module? Why does it have a drush lock on it, or something like that. So I mean, there are different levels of audit, I would say. The ones that we do for projects that are coming in usually end in a report of some sort, or a document that outlines our findings, as where an internal transfer of a project may just result in a couple of questions, and that's it.
Yeah, it's a good learning tool too, because that allows you to see how somebody else did something. I find that I discover a lot of modules that I've never heard of every time I do an audit. And it's not that I would necessarily use all those modules, but it's more, it's more exposure. Almost every audit I do, I find one or two small modules that either I'm going to use regularly in the future, or now I know, hey, if I have that problem in the future, we can use this module.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that, Nick, because we recently did an audit for a company that we're doing some work for, and as much as it was a process of finding what's wrong, it's also an interesting process to find out, I wouldn't have done it that way, but you did it that way, and why did you do it that way? And you learn a little bit. So it really is a great process for that. How about charging for an audit?
I think that's another instance where early on I made some mistakes, and now I've certainly learned. Early on, I would generally do that as part of the discovery and do it for free, as kind of value add and trying to win the customer, win the project. But I've since discovered
Nick,
that.
So you're saying that the discovery was free as well?
Oh yeah, yeah. I used to undervalue the value of discovery and audits. But for quite a while now, I won't do an evaluation without an associated cost, because it does draw on expertise, and it does provide useful information to the site owner or the developer that's providing it. The only time I'm not really charging for it is if I'm going back and looking over a client's project that I built in the past and just reviewing what I did, or doing it just kind of as a learning tool, primarily trying to figure out how something was done and build my own skills. But if it's doing it as an audit for a potential client, then it's something that I charge for, because then you can provide, as John said, you can provide a report to them that then they can take action on.
So, I agree with that. Wholeheartedly, you should be charging for audits, and sometimes you can just deliver that as a single service. You can do an audit for someone, they could take that audit and go do development from someone else, but should always be charging for that process.
Yeah, a lot of companies, and we've kind of floated the idea with a couple of projects, are doing a kind of a discovery phase where that's exactly what it is. You do all your discovery, and maybe that includes a site audit. And I will say the discovery phase is usually, or the discovery project is usually more of a new project thing than a, hey, you're bringing your site over to us and we're going to support it. But the discovery, the discovery phase or discovery project is something that we've floated on a couple of projects to do it, and giving them documentation or documents, sitemap, wireframe, so on and so forth, at the end of that. And just as you said, Steve, they can choose to go somewhere else, but hopefully we've built a relationship that they believe in, and they decide to continue. So I see a lot of value in that, and I as far as charging for an audit, that's for us. It's usually part of, if we're going to do an audit, it's either part of their onboarding fee, or it's a known fee, and there's a set of hours associated with it, because as Nick said, it takes time, and at the end of it, you're providing them with a report, and a lot of times that report is enlightening to them. They're like, oh, well, this was done. Well, I don't know why was that done? Why did they do that? And sometimes there are no answers. You can't talk to the previous developer due to whatever. But I think it's definitely something worth charging for.
Okay, so when you're getting started with an audit, there's some modules out there that can certainly help you move that along. So a couple of these modules we've talked about in the past, so we're not going to spend too much time on each of these. But there's a security review module, and that kind of checks some of the global security permissions and settings that the Drupal website has, and gives you a very quick way to see how much attention was paid to the security of the site. It's a very quick and easy module to use. A similar module in a similar vein is SiteAudit. The SiteAudit module gives you a general report, giving you an idea of what kinds of things have happened on the site, what's installed, what's not, that kind of thing.
I love SiteAudit. I mean, I don't know how often you guys have used it. It's not really a module. I think it's more like a Drush plugin, right? There's nothing in the user interface for it. It basically is a command line interface.
Yeah,
but it gives you all that core stuff. How many nodes? How many of this and that? How many modules are installed? I mean, a lot of the basic statistics you can use in an audit would come from that SiteAudit tool. Yep. I mean, that should be a no-brainer to install. It would give you a lot of the basic metrics.
Yep, it's if you're familiar with Drush at all, it's very simple to use.
Yeah.
The next module is similar, and that's Hacked. There is a module that goes along with this, but it's primarily a Drush interface, and it provides you a simple and easy way to see if people have made changes to either modules or core files, and that's one of the more important determining factors of how an audit is going to go, I find, because if people are modifying Drupal core and modules directly, then that's a very clear sign that you need to dig deeper in the rest of the audit. I'm not saying that if Hacked comes up clean that there's not a lot of stuff you need to look at, but if Hacked comes up showing that people are changing stuff, then you need to go through everything with a fine-tooth comb.
And my experience with Hacked is that the corollary is true. If it comes up with stuff, it doesn't mean there's anything wrong either.
Yeah. So
it's just a great tool. It's a good tool to get some insight into that.
Yep. Yeah. It's very good at seeing what specifically was changed. And then
the last
Hacked is pretty much just looking at diffs in code, right? It's looking at what version is installed, checking to see what version should be there, and then looking for any diffs in the code at that point, right? Kind of thing?
Yeah, so it looks at the version that's currently installed for each module and for Drupal, downloads that copy from Drupal.org, and then creates a diff between the two and says, these are the number of files changed, these are the ones that were changed, and then you can do a diff between them, so you can see they changed this file in this in this module.
Actually, used Hacked on my last audit. It was outrageously helpful. Simply in the aspect of getting code from another developer that I didn't feel was up to the Drupal standards, and just making sure that none of the modules were affected, or if they were patched correctly, as opposed to just going in there and kind of doing whatever.
And that's one of the key points right there. If people are making changes to the Drupal core, generally that's a sign that they're not following Drupal standards. So you want to look elsewhere. I mean, there are some exceptions. So, for example, if there was a site that there's a security patch that came out that they couldn't just run Drush up, and they patched Drupal with the security patch, it's a little bit different, but you can certainly start seeing what has happened to the site. And then the final thing to keep in mind for this section is look at what version Drupal it is. Determine if it was a live site around the time of Drupalgeddon, which was Drupal 7.32. If it was alive before that, you're going to have to look for signs of other tampering as well. If it's a development site and was never live, then it's not something you have to worry about. Or if it came out in the last year, same thing. But it's important to check for on older sites. And the next thing is the modules, taking a look at the module page. And I think that's you, John.
Yeah, no, it definitely is. It was lagging up a little bit there for some reason. So looking at the module page is something that I tend to do first in an audit, just to know what modules are installed. I mean, you get a site from somebody, and they could be using any sort of modules. I mean, you can look at base functionality on a site and understand, oh, it's a commerce site, they're going to be using commerce, or oh, it's a blog site, they're going to be using a blogging set of modules. But looking through that module page and reviewing those modules and each one is definitely very important. My most recent audit again was a great sharing experience for this show, because this is something where I went into the module page and I was looking at the modules and I'm like, what are these modules? And there's a whole bunch of modules that were perceivably custom modules, but in reality they ended up being feature generated modules. So there were different features that they had exported and that they were using that had appeared on the module screen and in the module folder. So when you're doing module review, two ways you can do it. You can do it through the Drupal UI, looking at the module page, or for me, it's a lot easier to go in and to look at the modules folder to see what modules are there. Of course, that's not going to really help you with active and inactive modules, so you will have to eventually go to the module screen. But you can also kind of get an understanding of, are there a lot of modules in the module folder that are inactive? Why are they there? Is it just cluttered? Could it be cleaned up?
What is the impact on a module that's there but not active? Does that impact the performance of the site in terms of taking up resources and memory?
No, I would say definitely not. But I think you're just looking at clutter. Your module folder is cluttered with modules that you're not going to use. So it makes it harder to navigate. Also, if you're doing Git, there are extra files in your repository that don't necessarily need to be there. So I personally like to keep a very clean modules folder and only have modules that I'm actually using or are actually installed there.
Yeah, it's important to keep it clean, just because, for this reason exactly, if somebody else is taking a look at the site and you have tons of modules that aren't being used, it gets confusing about, if you have something like user reference and node reference and entity reference, and they're all in there, determining if something was used or not, or which one's being used, is sometimes can get a little dicey. So it's important to always, keep it trimmed. And I think, on some pages it does, in certain situations, it can impact the performance. I think that, correct me if I'm wrong, but when you're clearing cache, it looks through the module folder and lists them. It only looks for hooks and enable modules, but I think it loads each module that's there. And there's some part of the Bootstrap that looks at all the modules in the folder.
And that's why I asked the question. I wasn't actually sure, and I feel
I
should know the answer to this question.
It must look at all of them, because on the modules screen you have the ability to enable modules, so it has to know the modules there, right?
Yeah.
So
But that's not happening on every page, I don't think.
well, right, of course not. It would be silly if it was, but I can see where that would be a performance impact. If you need to load an extra 50 modules that you're not using.
My record's 230 that I've seen.
Wow, that's a lot. Were they all active?
Oh no, they had I think the most I've seen on a site where they were unnecessary, where most of them were unnecessary, was 280 installed 480 modules installed, so in the folder, including submodules, and 260 enabled, I think. And after cleaning up, we ended up with about 100 enabled and I think 240 total.
So after looking through the module folder to see what modules are there, and if there have been any custom modules enabled, I would recommend probably looking at code to see what if there are custom modules to try to understand what they're doing. That's definitely going to be a big part to kind of doing the audit to make sure those modules are built correctly. But then definitely look at which ones are enabled, active versus inactive. The other thing you want to do is make sure if a module is inactive and there's no reason that it should be used on the site, just to look at the uninstall tab to make sure that the module's been fully uninstalled. In development, a lot of times we'll enable a module, try it out, it doesn't work, and get rid of it. I always make sure, because I want to keep my database as clean as possible too, to uninstall it. But not every developer may do that. So you may have a lot of modules that aren't being used on the site installed, having database tables in your database and whatnot. So checking the uninstall tab to make sure all the modules that aren't needed are uninstalled is definitely worthwhile.
And if they're old, and they've been sitting in that uninstall for a while, they can often cause troubles with the database.
Yeah.
Because they haven't been kept up with any database overall changes. I mean, it causes a lot of trouble.
And this is
always get rid of them. Yeah.
And this is an issue that's not going to exist in Drupal 8 because you can no longer disable modules from the module page. You have to uninstall them.
Uninstall them, right?
Which is a nice change.
And then the other thing is, obviously module updates. Part of your audit should be including to that client, oh, hey, you have 16 modules out of date, and they're, 5 of them are security updates. You might want us to do that first and foremost, because that's dangerous and bad. I think the last site I did an audit on, there were like 20 modules out of date, and 10 of them, maybe it was only 8 of them, were security updates. So, and it wasn't like 1 or 2 versions; it was quite a few versions. So, definitely making sure you're on top of your updates are important. And something I like to do in my reports actually is to kind of go through each module that is active on the site and just give the client an idea of what it does, just because that can also help with module duplication. Something that happens on a lot of audits is that you have 2 modules installed that kind of do the same thing, and what ends up happening is, like, a project goes from developer to developer. Developer 1 installs 1 module to do X, and then developer 2 doesn't realize that that module does what he needs it to do, and he installs what he prefers. And then what ends up happening is you have modules that are stacked up on top of each other, and that can cause problems. We actually saw an issue with that. It was more at the code level than module level, but it was one developer had hard-coded a jQuery dependency into their theme, and then another developer had come in and added jQuery update. So now jQuery is loading twice. Granted, it's loading the same version, or it's loading an old version and then a new version, so it's kind of overwriting itself. But still, it's unnecessary. So. Doing things like that and kind of documenting the modules that are being used can be very helpful. And you can do that in the spreadsheet. I tend to just do it in a Word document, kind of bulleted list style. Spreadsheet could be helpful to keep track of version numbers and whatnot, but that's definitely the person that's doing the audit's preference, I think.
One of the reasons why I use a spreadsheet is the way I usually build the spreadsheet is I create a list of all the module folder names in the module folder. And then I can just create a quick way to create a link to the Drupal.org page. So as I'm going through the list, I can make my notes, like for example, redundant or recommend remove or what is this, and any of the modules that I see that I don't know what they are, I can just click on the link without having to search Drupal.org.
Good idea. Yeah, it's a good way to document it.
Yeah, and then once I read it, I can be like, this module, and then I can make other comments like, this module is a sandbox module and shouldn't be used on production, or this module is in development, hasn't been updated
exactly,
in 4
right,
years. So I find it pretty helpful to set up a spreadsheet.
Drush also gives you the ability to list all your modules, both active and inactive, so that can be helpful too. If you're looking for that kind of information. So just keep that in mind. Drush can be helpful even though you're not doing things like installing modules or running cron.
Just muted myself by typing. So the next part of an audit is what I call the entity type review. So what you're going to be reviewing in this section is kind of the overall information architecture of the website. You're going to be overviewing, how people are putting together and interacting with different pieces of content. So you're trying to get an idea of what the information the website is trying to convey, and then how it's storing that information. And there's just a bunch of different things that you want to look at. So, for example, you want to look at all the different content types and the different fields that they're using. You want to try to get an idea if they're repeating fields or if they're creating new fields for each content type. Either is a good way to go, but it's important to know which one is, which one the website is using. You want to look at the users. Same thing. You want to see how the profiles are being built. You want to take a look at contributor modules like paragraphs or field collections, see if they're being used and how their display modes are being set, that kind of thing. It's important to remember that taxonomy is an entity as well. Take a look at that, see if people are adding extra fields to taxonomy, where they're being used, whether they're autocomplete tags, or drop-down lists, that kind of thing. And then you want to see if they're creating custom entities. It's not very common that people create custom entities in Drupal, but it's certainly possible. And in fact, in the last audit that I did, I discovered a new module. I don't recall off the top of my head what it's called, but it's like an entity create module. It allows you to create your own entities. And then you always want to just, when you're doing the module review, see if there's a module that creates other entities. Like, for example, commerce creates the product entity, or groups creates the membership entity, and you just want to see how they're all interacting with each other and seeing if there's a more logical division. You might not be changing it, but it's important to know.
I find that when I look at the entity types, that it's one of the bigger sections that gives me insight into the experience level of the person who developed the website. Like, I'll often see, and we saw this recently, where someone created 15 content types where it could have been one with a taxonomy. Yeah. And it was you could see that it was someone that was learning Drupal and didn't understand the power of taxonomy, and they built like tons of content types. So I usually find that there's a lot of insight into how these content types are built.
Yeah, and you can sometimes, depending on how deep you have to go, you can build reports and see things like how many. You can see if people are adding fields as they go by looking at when fields were filled out versus when the content was created. So you can get an idea, like if they built 100 pages and then added this field, and then built another 10, and then add another field, you can get an idea of how firm their content strategy is or their information architecture is and see if that's an area where you can provide some insight as well. So once you have an idea of how they're storing their content and kind of what their schema is for storing the data and entering the data, the next part is to look at the display.
Yeah, page view pages, or how pages are built, are definitely interesting insight into how the developer was thinking, or how the developer was putting things together. Similarly to the back-end information table structure and content types, you can tell a lot from the front-end structure of the site. Are they theming things properly? Is the site using a lot of blocks, or is the site using context? Are views being used to the best of their ability? These are all things that we like to look at, because a lot of times you'll get a site and you'll say, hey, this block disappears under X, Y, and Z circumstance. How is this happening? Is it context? Oh, no, it's not. So it must be something in the theme. One thing that is really important, and part of how the page is built is the theme and the templates used to drive that. And we actually found this on one of our last audits, is where you're implementing code within your theme. So what I mean by that is, are you putting pieces of functionality into your theme? So, I need this block to display in this section, and is that a theme function? A lot of times, when we're building themes for sites that we're building, we definitely try to keep the functionality out of the theme as far as how blocks are being placed, or validating a user, because we want to be able to swap those. Or the idea is, and especially with Drupal, is you should be able to swap the theme out and not have it really affect the functionality. So something to keep in mind, and the reason I bring this up is because we actually found this on one of our last audits, is that take a look at your template files, take a look at your theme, and make sure that the code that's in there makes a lot of sense. There could be templates for blocks as well, and those block templates could be also used to handle display strategies. Display suite is actually a great thing to look for. If they're using display suite, to me that says they have a little bit of a better idea of what's going on in Drupal, and that's kind of a more advanced way of displaying things on a site. Do you guys have any suggestions in this area?
I have some interesting thoughts here. Is that oftentimes, different Drupal developers have different strategies to do things. Like, it's always like, are you a display suite guy? You're a panels guy. You mean, like, well, what is your initial tact at developing a site? And I think we need to be careful when you're doing an audit not to inject your biases into the reality, because let's say you're a display suite guy, but you inherited a site that is really a panel-based site, but you don't use panels. It doesn't mean that's wrong. And I think there's lots of evidence that shows that panels aren't a wrong way to go. It might be different from what you do.
It's funny you bring that up, Steve, because I was actually going to mention that while Nick was talking about content types and fields and that sort of thing. I definitely think you have to be very objective when you're looking at an audit, because there are, as we all know, and we've all said a million times, there are a ton of different ways to do things within Drupal. And just because somebody does something not the way you would do it doesn't mean that it's wrong. So
absolutely,
a lot of times with our audits, what we're really looking for is, are they following Drupal coding standards? Are they using best practices? And that's why I brought up the functionality piece in your theme, as far as block displays and stuff like that being tied so closely to a theme. Because to me, the beauty of Drupal is being able to swap out your themes or being able to retheme a site and not have to worry about, oh, I just dropped my theme and all of a sudden half my site stopped working because there was so much functionality built into the theme. So
Yeah,
that's really a sticking point for me.
and I think part of the objectivity is really looking and seeing whoever built the site, if they were being consistent. So if they chose to use panels versus display suite, or are they using display suite for some things, panels for other things, and then they're also outputting a view and some custom code, and then using context for half the site, but then they're also using the block interface. Those are the kinds of things that throw up red flags for me when they're kind of doing a little bit of everything. If it's consistent and then there's exceptions that are logical, then that's generally fine. But if, for example, if I see somebody using the block interface and context, well, there's no real reason to ever do that.
Right.
But using display suite versus panels, either one is fine.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think your point there, Nick, is spot on, is looking for consistency across how they're developing things. And also looking for the standards that you would expect. Like when they're building views, are they using the default view block names all the time, or are they fixing them so it doesn't say, view-1? What are the levels of things that they're doing, and are they doing them consistently?
Or even to that note, even how they're building views. Are they using the same view with different displays as they should, or are they building a new view every time they need, content? Is there, one instance of this that it could be amusing to some is like if you have a blog and you're displaying those blogs and you have a full blog display and then a paged blog display, and then you're pulling one blog out that you want to put in a block. Well, it should all really be different displays of the same view because they're all dealing with blog content. But are they separating those out into 3 separate views? Like that's a big indicator to me of, again, talking about that beginner, that Drupal beginner that's just doing this and kind of fumbling their way through. So that's a great point as well.
It's funny because if you look at a website, and it could be sites that you built yourself or a site from someone else, is that there's usually an evolution in knowledge and experience. And you can often look at a single website and see evolution of experience within that one site.
Yep.
And it's hard when you look at the audit at the end. So at the end of that 1 year of growth, you could come in as a bystander and say, hey, and it looks like the site is a mess. And it probably is a mess, but it was an evolution of that user and that developer growing over a period of time as the site evolved. So it doesn't necessarily change the audit, but it does give perspective into what you're looking at.
Yeah, and that happens personally too. Like there's a site that I work on. It's one of the first sites I ever built, and it started in Drupal 5 and it's now in Drupal 7. And every time I go back to that client and go for a rebuild, I'm shaking my head at what I did. Like right now, one of the main projects is I'm combining, I think, 5 content types into one.
Right.
Because they're all pretty much exactly the same, should be differentiated with taxonomy, but instead, they have one content type that has 200 nodes, and the other 4 have 10 between them.
Right.
So it's it's important that you probably go back and audit some of your older sites as well,
right.
Every once in a while, whether or not it's for the client, just so that you can see where the growth has been, and if you're still doing the same things the same way you were 4 years ago, then you should do some soul searching.
So let's talk about functionality a little bit. So when I say functionality, we're talking about things that happen in the site, not necessarily related to the data structures, not necessarily related to how the content's viewed, but things about how the site functions. So you should be looking at things like how are they using rules, and how are the rules constructed, and what are they using them for? I mean, are they using them for everything? Are they just using them in a limited basis? Get a real understanding of how the rules are that they're using in the website. Custom code, John already mentioned this, so we don't need to spend too much time on it, but if there is custom modules there, that is a place that you should spend a serious amount of time taking a look at, is to see what Drupal standards and PHP standards are using in that custom code, and how is that custom code structured. A great place to take a peek at. In addition to, are they using the PHP module? If they are, how are they using it? Where is PHP being injected into the database in different places? We all know that that's a bad thing to do. We also know that we all have had to do it. So it's trying to understand where it is, and are there places it could be removed and replaced with something different. Cron implementation is something else to look at. Is how are they dealing with back-end processes? Are they using basic cron? Are they using is it Alicia cron? Is that what it's called? Alicia cron. Are they running cron from people just hitting the web page, or are they running cron from a back-end process on the server? Which is probably what you should be doing. So things like that. Email processes, anything that's really about the functionality of the website, and this is probably one of the toughest areas to make an evaluation on, to figure it all out and to understand what they're doing. But there are the key areas that we just mentioned: rules, custom code, PHP, cron, email processes. If you're looking at those things, you're probably getting a pretty good understanding for the audit basis in terms of where this site sits. Is someone, and I think really what you want to get to here, is someone taking on programming where they shouldn't be because there's a module that does it, or is there a good balance there?
Yeah, and as Stephen said, it's definitely one of the tougher parts, but for this part more than the other parts, I think it's important to have somebody, generally a business person, somebody who's familiar with the site, giving you an idea of this is what the website does, this is how we interact with it, because that will give you the clues to look for. For example, this is how we author this content, this is how we interact with the user base, that kind of thing. And then you can use those clues to find out where to look in configuration for that kind of functionality.
And looking for custom code is a pretty quick indication of the sophistication of the developer that had this before you.
Yeah.
If they've got hooks in there and they're well organized and they make sense and they're well documented, it gives you a pretty good understanding of what that person's level of knowledge of Drupal was when they built the website. So I find that the custom code, when you're looking at custom code, if someone built it, the level of what you see there usually matches all of the other things that you've already looked at, which is if you look at the custom code, it makes sense, it's well documented, there are hooks that make sense in terms of what the project's trying to do. You'll usually find, in my experience, that the views are probably built properly, that the content types make sense. So to me, it's a quick indicator of the experience level of the developer.
The other thing with custom code, I mentioned this a little bit earlier, is you want to make sure that it's following the Drupal coding standards. That can also be an indicator to you that, if the code is, as Steve said, structured well and is following Drupal coding standards, it can be an indicator that, oh, this person at least knew a little bit about Drupal or has read the coding standards. One audit that we did, we looked at the code, and the code was kind of messy and clearly did not follow any of the Drupal coding standards. At that point, we kind of knew that we were kind of heading into a dangerous territory. Something else, and again, I talked about this earlier, was functionality within your theme. Your theme's going to have a certain amount of quote-unquote functionality, as far as maybe some JavaScript for button click or something like that. But making sure that there aren't crazy PHP functions in your theme is important. And also, the next step here for us in the audit process not only auditing the theme to make sure there's no crazy PHP in there, but auditing the theme to make sure that the theme is built appropriately and is built well. Auditing for things like external libraries, seeing if there's external libraries being used in the theme, or figuring out what type of CSS preprocessor they may have been using, if they're even using one. So if you go into the theme and you see Sass files, oh, hey, I got to use Sass on this. Or if you see less files, knowing, oh, I have to use less. As well as knowing if they're using any sort of JavaScript assistance or JavaScript framework, such as Grunt or Bourbon Neat, and anything like that. You really need to know what they use to build the theme, and to be able to really understand it and service it as best you can.
I just have to make one comment, and that's, for me, it's usually like, oh, they're using Sass, so we're going to use Sass. Oh, they're using less, I'm going to be writing CSS.
Right.
I generally don't work with less anymore, but that's neither here nor there.
And that's valid. I mean, maybe there's part of your audit is like, oh, it's going to cost you 10 hours for us to convert this less to Sass because it's going to work better for everybody involved and cost you less money in the long run. I mean, that's very valid. And there have been instances where we've had to do that. It's not unheard of. But if you don't do the audit, you don't look at the theme, you won't know.
And John, to your point, exactly, is that your audit can be based on you too, by the way. And we're going to talk about this in the documentation in a few more minutes, but it could be, listen, this is what's there, and this is what I recommend doing. This isn't necessarily what John would recommend doing, but this is what I recommend doing, and this is what it will cost you. I mean, so if you're looking at someone who's doing less, or you're looking at someone who's doing, let's just move back up the topic 10 minutes ago, which is, hey, I'm a panels guy, but this thing wasn't using panels. So my recommendation, if you want to work with me, is I'm going to convert stuff to panels because of these reasons. And that's okay. I mean, it's an audit from you and your company.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. And that's honestly, not to harp on this, but I mean, that's honestly going to save your client money in the long run. If you have to work with technologies that you're not overly familiar with or that are antiquated, that takes time for you to kind of ramp up on that and get a system set up for that. Right. So, that could be precious development hours that you're actually saving the client by converting to the new latest and greatest.
Right.
And with that kind of brings us to the end of the actual Drupal audit. There's still a couple of things that need to be audited, but they're not directly related to the website itself. It's always important when you're taking over an existing site to take a look at the hosting environment. The kinds of things that you want to look at here are, are they on a shared server? Are they on a VPS? What level of resources do they have? Is the site slow? Is it fast? How much are they spending on hosting? Who has access to it? So just general questions. For example, you want to make sure that if you're taking over a new project, that the only people that have access to the server are you and your client. You want to make sure that they're revoking access for other people because you don't want, you just want to be able to be sure that the code you're writing is the code that's running. And that, that's a general security thing, but it has to, starts at the host level. The next thing that you want to kind of look at is the development process. Things, high-level questions like, are they using version control? Are they using SVN or Git? Are they using something else? Do they have some sort of, what's their process for reporting bugs and feature requests? Are they using a ticketing system, or do they just rely on email? And if they're relying on email, are they open to using your ticketing system or their own ticketing system? Determining what kind of testing process they have, whether it's just having a dev environment and somebody somebody from your team and their team manually clicks through it and reviews things, or if they have a testing, full-blown, continuous integration environment set up. It's also important to look at deployment. So once you've got a new feature or you fixed a bug, what is their deployment process? And again, like Stephen said, all of these are things where you can have input. At this point, you're kind of just looking at what they have in place to get an idea of how far you need to go. Once that's done, I generally try to end with a performance review. So if it's an existing site or even dev site, do some benchmarking. See how fast the site is, how if it's slow, and give some recommendations to make sure it's more performant. And that can range from everything from compressing the images better to, in one case, I had a site that they had a program that was compiling SAS on every page view. So we're recommending removing that to, installing Varnish or Memcache or HA Proxy or Nginx, or, installing some other type of software on the server to make Drupal run faster. And once you get that,
so Nick, in terms of the performance side of this, how key is this in your audit, like in terms of performance? But yeah, I can't say in terms of performance, but
yeah.
in terms of the overall scope of the audit review, do people care about the performance more than they care about some of the other details in terms of a customer side? That's really what I'm asking, actually.
It really depends on the customer. I mean, people come to you for a few different reasons. One is their developer disappeared. Another is, their developer got a job or moved somewhere else, or something is broken on the site. And then a very common one is the site is really slow.
Right.
So,
and that's why I'm bringing this up. It's like, it feels like it always comes up to me as the secondary question when all the other questions come up, like you just mentioned, is, hey, you know what? We need a new developer for a variety of reasons, right? And by the way, the site doesn't run fast. It always feels like it's the secondary kind of thing someone says.
Can also
sometimes it's primary, but you're right. A lot of times
can also be a value add in a lot of scenarios. Maybe the client doesn't come to you with performance issues, but as you're doing your audit, you notice, hey, APC is not installed. Oh, Memcache isn't here. Oh, this and this other thing could be installed to make the site run faster. And it's something that you can kind of value add to your client, saying, hey, I noticed that there are these 5 things that we could do that would really speed the site up, and nowadays site speed is a factor for your search engine ranking, for how people stay on your site, if your site works well over a mobile device. So even if it's not something that they're bringing to you, it can definitely be a value add for you to kind of pitch or inform your client of.
You've done all this great work, you've done all this great research, and the question is at the end, how do you deliver this to them? Which I think is almost the most important piece of this. Like, if you do a little research, you do a lot of research, in the end, it's about what are you delivering to them and how are you delivering it.
I like to deliver a video where I sing the results to them.
All right, I got to see one of those, John. I love a format that basically does something that says, regardless of if you deliver it in a Excel spreadsheet or a Word doc or whatever, I'm really talking about the content you deliver. So I like the thing that says, here are the facts. They're unbiased. I mean, these are the facts. These are what it is for each category. And here are some notes that I have about that, and then these are my recommendations. So I like to try to separate what is actually happening and some comments about those things, and then what I would do if it was me. Kind of my recommendation based on my company and my skills and my expertise. And I like to divide it into those 3 things.
Okay, that makes sense.
You guys agree with that?
Yeah, no, I mean, mine's usually, I tailor it to the client. So if I'm doing a review for somebody who developed the site themselves, then it's a little bit more collaborative. But usually it gets rolled into the discovery document, and it's kind of it's similar. It's like talking about these are the things that I found. This is the process it looks like the developer, the previous developers took.
Mm-hmm.
These are the strengths I saw. These are the things I would focus on fixing. And then I generally try to give an idea of level of effort. So here's 10 things to do. These 3 things are very, very easy and quick to do and don't affect anything. These 3 things are a little bit more complex, but the answer and whether or not you do that might depend on some business logic. And then, here's 3 or 4 things that probably need to be looked at, but they need to be dug in further to give a recommendation either way, other than they need to be looked at. So I try to give an idea of.
Do you separate your audit from your costs to do the things that you've recommended?
What do you mean?
So do you give an audit document that's independent from the costs for you to deliver what you're recommending they change?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay,
so I generally provide a proposal as well as the audit report.
Right.
The audit report is
should be geared towards anyone looking at it.
Yeah.
That doesn't know what you are charging to make the recommendations and fixes. Yeah.
Yeah. So the proposal is generally confidential and not able to be shared outside the client. The audit report is generally owned by the client, and they can share that.
Right. With an important note, though, and I put this in the show notes here, I always think you should copyright your audit reports with your copyright information in the footers on every page.
Yeah,
so,
that's important.
Yeah, I'm not sure why I say that exactly, except that I don't want someone necessarily to take my audit in the PDF format that I would deliver it in and share that with someone else as if it was someone else's report. I want to make sure it's tied to me.
The other something else I like to do is actually review the report with the client on a phone call, and not detail every page, but just go over kind of the high level stuff or some areas of real concern. Go through each section with them, either in person or via a video call of some sort, just so that way they have a full understanding of what's being delivered, and they can ask any questions that come up to them at that point in time. Because a lot of times you're giving this document to somebody that may not be overly tech savvy or really understanding of what we do. You're doing the audit, and they're expecting this document, but sometimes questions can arise. So I like to take the time to go over the document with them and kind of make that the almost the upsell or the next steps meeting where we can kind of talk about what's coming up next.
That's actually a really good point. I don't share the proposal or the audit until we're on that call, because it's just too easy for somebody just to take it, very quickly glance through it, and maybe not understand a piece of it or misunderstand it. So I generally find it better to share it as I'm speaking to them, to give them like you said, here's important, here's how you review this document, and this is these are the things that you should take away from it. And then that allows them to ask questions about the proposal at the same time, and then they can ask any questions about that right away. I find that the ability to continue that relationship is much higher when it's shared in person or over the phone than when it's emailed off and then there's discussion later.
Yeah, John, I think your point is great. I also think that you should put an executive summary in these documents, like you should in most documents if you're dealing with bigger companies. That is basically a section at the top of the document that gives just a basic overview, which would say, hey, this Drupal site is in pretty good shape, but hey, I think there's a few areas that need to be addressed, and you can see them below. Or, hey, this Drupal site is a piece of crap, and there's lots of reasons that this thing is bad. Please see the issues below. So an executive summary kind of thing at the top is a great document structure for any documents you deliver.
It should really be one sentence, whether it's
Yeah.
crap or it's okay.
Yeah,
That way
maybe.
they read the rest of the document to figure out why
Yeah.
you came to
Right.
that conclusion.
Right. All right.
Okay.
Great, guys. Let's move on to the module of the week.
Yeah, so the module of the week this week is IP geolocation. It's a helper module that will help your geolocation modules connect with a map. It integrates very well with two very popular mapping libraries, both Leaflet and Google Maps. And it gives you a lot of flexibility in how those maps are generated. So it gives you the ability to customize markers. It gives you the ability to customize color, size, placement, regions of joining markers. So when they touch it, if they should join together in a bigger marker. It's a fairly complex module. It takes a little bit of tinkering to understand all the settings. But it's one of those modules where once you figure it out, you realize that it's actually very well built. You just have to make sure you have the correct settings in place, and it's pretty straightforward to build secondary maps once you know which settings are important for your particular use. I'm a very big fan, and the project page is IP_geoloc.
So Nick, just out of curiosity, how does this compare with something like the Gmaps module, or I'm drawing a blank on another mapping service, but where does this kind of fall in?
It gives you a lot more out-of-the-box flexibility. So the Google API is very powerful and very strong, but in my experience, the Google Maps module, unless it's updated in the last few months, doesn't give you access to all the features. This module tends to give you a lot more finer control and access to the.
Nick, can you give us some examples of that? Like what does that mean to you? Like you have access to things. Yeah.
Yeah. So I remember. So most of my experience with this is with the Leaflet module rather than the Google Maps module. But I recall having some difficulty customizing marker icons directly through the Leaflet module or the Gmaps module. The IP geolocation, though, made it very easy to say, if this condition is true, use this marker. If this other condition is true, use this other marker. And then things like if these two markers are touching at the zoom level, join them together. And if you click on them, zoom in. So it seems to take advantage of the API to a greater degree than the modules that are set for them.
Great. All right, so check out the IP geolocation module, and let's go to our announcements for the week. So we have one announcement for Talking Drupal, and it's exploring Drupal 8, which could be something you've heard of in the past. And if you've heard of it in the past, you can forget what you've heard. So go to exploringdrupal8.com, and what you'll see is we're, I guess, officially announcing right now that we are putting together a Drupal 8 audio series with the help of Sego Solutions from New York. And we're going to put a 6-part series together, an audio series, to help you get started with Drupal 8. We're going to cover in 3 sessions site building for Drupal 8, and then in 3 sessions module development for Drupal 8, which will then be followed up by 2 webinars that will be in January. So we're trying to deliver some content here to help people get jump started with Drupal 8 for no cost. I mean, you can learn a little bit more about Drupal 8 and get moving quicker. That's what our hope is. And this audio series will be available on December 8th. We'll be recording it a few weeks before. We'll get 6 episodes on December 8th, and then you can sign up for the webinars in January. And if you go to exploringdrupal8.com, you can sign up for those now.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's we had Nick and Mike into the New England Drupal camp. They did a Drupal 8 training. They did some sessions, and it was well received. and it was a great experience working with these guys. So we're really excited to be working with them again to put some Drupal training together. And I hate to call this training, but some more specific Drupal content, Drupal 8 content on talking Drupal over the next few months.
It's going to be good.
Okay, do we have any more announcements?
Drupal 8 is coming out tomorrow.
It is, right? I mean, today is the 18th. It's the 19th tomorrow, right? That
Yep.
seems weird, doesn't it, to say that?
Yeah, it's weird that it's coming out tomorrow. I'm going to be going to the Providence meetup launch party, so I'm looking forward to it. But it feels surreal. Kind of feels unreal that it's coming out tomorrow. But it's been a long road.
That's why we haven't talked about it until this point. We'll see. We'll see if it actually happens.
It better happen, right?
Yeah, there are going to be a lot of unhappy party goers if it doesn't.
It will be there. I mean, the question comes down to, what we all experience when we're doing our first Drupal 8 projects. And I've just started my first one for a production site. I think, Nick, you're in the same boat, right?
Yeah, I'm building one. I started building one about a week and a half ago.
Right.
So it's already running into some contrib issues, but I think they'll very quickly get resolved.
Yeah, but we're not shocked by that, right? Well, like,
No.
if you were going to say, hey, I'm going to start a Drupal 8 project today, and you say, what are the risks? It's the contrib area, right? So that's no big surprise.
Yeah.
How about you, John?
We got a couple coming in. I look forward to starting them. I did work on my own site.
You did.
A couple weeks ago on one of our hack days, and it was a good time. Same sort of scenario Nick was in, where I was like, oh, I need this module. Oh, it's not Drupal 8 ready yet. Okay, well, how else can I do this?
Right.
So that's definitely a concern, but
so the difference,
I think it'll get better.
The difference there, John, is when you build something for yourself, which you're not charging yourself for, I don't think, and versus building actually something for a customer that you've committed to deliverables and you've quoted a price, that becomes a little bit more stressful. So I think that will be the world that we're going to be living in for the next 6 or 8 months.
Yeah, I think adoption will be a little bit quicker, considering Views is out there, but it's still going to be a while. I mean, like, for example, the Feeds module still needs some work before it's ready, and that's a fairly, it's fairly good, but some of the different processors don't work. So it's
what's funny is that, while we all say, hey, there's been a bunch of stuff moved into core, like Views. You said, well, Views is already there. I mean, Views was already there for all of us 5 years ago. I mean, it was, while it's not part of core, it was part of our core, right? So it's those other things that were not part of our core over the past 4 years. Where do those things stand? So it'll be interesting to see what happens, but this is a great step for Drupal. It's exciting to have the launch tomorrow, and we'll see what happens, right? I mean, it'll be interesting over the next few months to see how we talk about this product.
Definitely.
Okay, so I guess we'll call this the end of episode 108, Drupal Audit. Thank you guys for joining again. And John, tell us about where you are and how people can contact you.
Wow, where I am. Tonight I'll actually be in Newport at Newport Interactive Marketers, so if you're in the Newport area, Rhode Island area, you want to come down to that, should be a good time. Tomorrow I will, as well as Nick and Stephen, will all be at the Drupal 8 release party here in Providence at the Umfink offices, so if you're in the Providence area, feel free to come on by. And then as far as those people that may not be in the area and may want to reach out, you can find me on all the major social networks at John Picozzi, and always on at umfink.com.
And how about you, Nick?
You can find me online at NixFan, NICXVAN, pretty much everywhere. And just like the other two guys here, you'll see me tomorrow in Providence at the release party. So looking forward to coming down to Providence tomorrow.
Great. It'll be good for us to all get together again. And this time we're not bowling. So, I'm Stephen Cross at Stephen Cross on Twitter. We could just leave it at that so we can end the show and talk to everyone next week. See ya.
See you next week.
Bye.
Have a good one.